Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. This is a podcast where I read old books, sometimes fiction, sometimes non-fiction, in the most boring way I can, to try to help slow your spinning mind enough for you to fall asleep in the most natural way possible. The stresses of life often follow us to bed and keep us company, but I'm here to distract you from them and to help you drift away. Before you do fall asleep, if you find Sleepy Time Tales helpful and you'd like to support me, to keep it going out to you and thousands of your fellow insomniacs, please consider signing up on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. If monthly's a bit much, you can put a tip in the tip jar in the Ko-Fi. These options are linked in the show notes. Or you can support Sleepy Time Tales by simply spreading the word. If you know someone who's struggling to sleep, you can let them know about it, how to find it, how to listen to it, and leave it from there. And that's enough of that. Tonight we have 2 works about the joy of birds. So snuggle down, close your eyes, breathe deeply, and listen closely as I lead you down the path to sleep. Back again to Birds in Their Nests by Mary Howitt. Like the rook, the magpie inhabits the same nest for several years, perhaps for the whole of his life, putting it into repair every year before he again needs it for family use, like a wealthy country family taking possession of their ancestral mansion in the spring. And now, turning to our picture, we find our magpie in excellent circumstances. Everything has gone well with him. Here he is, and I'll have the pleasure of giving you a bit of everyday magpie life, as sketched by that true pen and ink artist, the author of British Birds. Our scene opens a few minutes before the time indicated in our picture. There on the old ash tree you may see a pair, one perched on the topmost twig, the other hopping on the branches below, keeping up an incessant chatter. How gracefully she, on the topmost twig, swings in the breeze. Off she starts, and directs her flight to the forwards opposite, chattering all the way, seemingly to call her mate after her. But he prefers remaining behind. He is in a brown study or something of that kind, as we can plainly see. Now, having spied something below, he hops downwards from twig to branch and descends to the ground. His ash tree, you must understand, grows close to, and in part overshadows a farmyard. So now he is on ground which, as is customary in such places, is not over clean. Therefore, lifting up his tail to prevent it being soiled or wet, as the farmer's wife might hold up her Sunday gown, and raising his body as high as possible, he walks a few paces, and spying an earthworm half out of his hole, drags it forth by a sudden jerk, breaks it in pieces and swallows it. Now, under the hedge, he has found a snail, which he will presently pick out of its shell, as an old woman would a periwinkle. But now something among the bushes has startled him, and he springs lightly upwards, chattering the while to regain his favourite tree. It is a cat, which, not less frightened than himself, for both are intent on mischief, runs off towards the barn. The magpie again descends, steps slowly over the grassy margin of the yard, looking from side to side, stops, listens, advances rapidly by succession of leaps, and encounters a whole brood of chickens with their mother at their heels. If she had not been there, he would have had a delicious feast of one of those chickens, but he dare not think of such a thing now. For with fury in her eye, bristled plumage, and loud clamour, the hen rushes forward at him, overturning 2 of her younglings. And the enemy, suddenly wheeling round to avoid the encounter, flies off to his mate. There again you perceive them in the meadow as they walk about with their elevated tails, looking for something eatable. By the hedge, afar off, are 2 boys with a gun endeavouring to creep up to a flock of plovers on the other side. But the magpies see them, for there are not many things which escape their sharp eyes, and presently rising, they fly directly over the field, chattering vehemently, and the flock of plovers on this take wing, and the disappointed young sportsmen sheer off in another direction. Magpies always make a great chattering when they are disturbed, or when they apprehend that danger is near. Waterton says they are vociferous at the approach of night, and that they are in truth valuable watchmen on that account. Whoever enters the wood, he says, is sure to attract notice, and then their challenge is incessant. When I hear them during the night, or even during the day, I know that mischief is on the stir. 3 years ago, at 11 o'clock in the day, I was at the capture of one of the most expert and desperate poachers, to whose hiding place we were directed by the chatter of the magpies. The poor magpie has many enemies, and knowing this is always on the watch and easily alarmed. Its mode of walking is like that of the rook, but not having any dignity to maintain, it every now and then leaps in a sidelong direction. When alarmed itself or wishing to announce danger to other birds, it utters a sort of chuckling cry or chatter. If a fox or cat or any other unfriendly animal approaches, it hovers about it and alarms the whole neighborhood by its cries, till the enemy is out of sight. Like the jackdaw, it generally keeps in pairs the whole year round, and indeed, when birds continue to inhabit the same nest, season after season, it is quite natural that they should do so. It is a curious fact, however, that if by any accident the hen magpie is killed while sitting on her eggs, her mate sets off at once and brings home another wife, who takes to the nest and eggs, just as if she had laid them, and if by another mischance she too should come to an untimely end, the widower again goes off, and without any loss of time brings back a third wife, and she takes to her duties quite as naturally and lovingly as the other one did. But where all these surplus mothers come from is a question which no naturalist has yet answered, and the magpie, with all his chattering, is not clever enough to explain the wonder. The beauty of this bird's plumage is familiar to all, and although it is simply black and white, yet the exquisitely coloured gloss of green, blue, and purple, with their varying and intermingling tints, produce such a charming effect that one cannot sufficiently admire them. With the external structure of the magpie's nest we are acquainted. The lower part inside is neatly plastered with mud, and is furnished, says Bewick, with a sort of mattress, formed of wool or fibrous roots, on which from 3 to 6 eggs are laid. The eggs frequently vary both in size and colour. Sometimes they are of a pale green, freckled over with amber brown, and light purple. Sometimes pale blue, with smaller spots of the same dark colours. The nest is, so to speak, a sort of little dome chamber, of a good size for its purpose. But then comes the question, what does the magpie do with her long tail as she sits on her eggs? It would certainly poke a hole through the wall if left to its full extent. She must therefore lift it up, as she does when walking amongst the wet grass, and sit with it laid flat against the wall, which probably is not inconvenient to her. Chapter 22. The Nuthatch. This bird is almost an entire stranger to most people. It belongs to the rather large family of creepers, birds which, like the woodpecker and the little golden-crested wren, run up the holes and branches of trees in search of food. The nuthatch, however, has an advantage over all its other creeping relatives by being gifted with the power of coming down the tree head foremost, which none of them have. It can also sleep with its head downwards. Neither in its rapid ascent has it occasion to press its tail against the tree for help, so that it is the most accomplished little acrobat of the whole race of creepers. The nuthatch cannot be called a rare bird, and yet is not often seen, being of a shy and retiring disposition, though naturally lively and active. The plumage is very pleasing in colour, the upper parts of the body are bluish-grey. A black line passes from the corners of the mouth to the back of the neck, the breast and underparts light reddish-yellow and the sides reddish-brown. It delights in woods and trees, nor need it be looked for elsewhere, as it derives its food entirely amongst them, either of insects and larvae hidden in the bark, or of fruits and nuts, as kernels of fir cones, beech and other nuts, the shells of which it breaks in a very ingenious manner, which I shall presently describe. Now and then it alights on the ground, and then advances by short leaps. It has no song, but in winter, when living in small companies, perhaps the whole summer family associating together, it has a little piping note, which, however, is supposed to be simply the call to each other. It is said to be sensitive to the cold, and always feeds on the side of the wood or the tree which is defended from the wind. In spring, however, when all nature is renovated with a quicker pulse of life, for as Tennyson says, in the spring a fuller crimson comes upon the robin's breast, and in the spring the wanton lapwing gets himself another crest. In the spring a livelier iris changes on the burnished dove. Then also the silent nuthatch sends forth through the awakening solitude of the woods his two little notes, one short and twittering, the other a low, mellow, flute-like whistle, which is so clear that it may be heard to a considerable distance. The graphic author of British Birds says, "It is at all times a busy and cheerful bird, particularly at nesting time. Its favourite food is nuts of any kind. It builds and roosts in hollow trees and is seldom seen in the open fields, unless when in quest of the stones of the white thorn or sloe. It may therefore be properly called a forester. Its dexterity in opening nuts and the stones of fruit is curious. It fixes the nut in a crack, or on the top of a post, or in the bark of a tree, and placing itself above it, head downward, striking with great force and rapidity, with its strong wedge-shaped bill on the edge of the shell, splits it open. When their food is plentiful, they have a favourite crack for unshelling the kernels, as sometimes a peck of broken shells may be seen under this crack. The Reverend W.T. Bree tells us that the tapping of the bird on the hard shell may be heard at a considerable distance, and that during the operation it sometimes happens that the nut swerves from its fixture and falls towards the ground. It has not descended, however, for the space of more than a few yards, when the nuthatch, with admirable adroitness, recovers it in the fall, and replacing it in its former position, commences the attack afresh. The fall of the nut in the air and the recovery by the bird on the wing I have seen repeated several times in the space of a few minutes. This is a little act of skill in the bird which it would be charming to observe, and here again I would remark, as I have so often done before, that this is but a single instance of what many of us, living in the country, might witness in some woodland nook near at hand, if we would only be lovingly still and patient, and interest ourselves in the ways and means of the innocent animal life around us. The nest of the bird also deserves our notice, and let me here call your attention to the beautiful and living little portrait of the bird at home, given to us by Mr. Harrison Weir, than which we have nothing more truthful from his pencil. The home of the nuthatch is nothing more, to begin with, than the hole in an old tree, which probably has been deserted by the woodpecker. As, however, the woodpecker either requires a more enlarged entrance to her nursery, or considers it more seemly, the nuthatch, who merely likes a snug little hole to creep in at, and nothing more, walls up the opening with a plastering of clay or mud, leaving only just enough room for herself to enter. Perhaps she may be afraid of the old tenants returning and again taking possession, so builds up a little defence in front, but of that I cannot say. Certain it is she makes herself comfortably at home and in a rather untidy nest, composed mostly of dead oak leaves, and here she lays 6 or 7 white eggs with ruddy spots on them. If the plaster wall be by any chance removed, the poor bird loses not a moment in replacing it, and though she has apparently great dread of any enemy, the woodpecker, snake, man, or whatever else he may be disturbing her, yet so faithfully devoted is she to her duties, that scarcely anything will induce her to leave the eggs or young. She fights vigorously in defense of her home and its treasures, striking out with her bill and wings, and making a hissing, angry noise. Nay, timid and shy as she naturally is, she will suffer herself to be carried off captive rather than desert a charge. Let me conclude with one of Bechstein's anecdotes of the nuthatch. A lady amused herself in the winter by throwing seeds on the terrace below the window to feed the birds in the neighborhood. She put some hemp seed and cracked nuts even on the windowsill, and on a board for her particular favorites, the blue tits. 2 nuthatches came one day to have their share of this repast, and were so well pleased that they became quite familiar, and did not even go away in the following spring to get their natural food and to build their nest in the wood. They settled themselves in the hollow of an old tree near the house. As soon as the 2 young ones which were reared here were ready to fly, they brought them to the hospitable window, where they were to be nourished, and soon after disappeared entirely. It was amusing to see these 2 new visitors hang or climb on the walls or blinds, while their benefactress put their food on the board. These pretty creatures, as well as the tits, knew her so well that when she drove away the sparrows, which came to steal what was not intended for them, they did not fly away also, but seemed to know that was done was only to protect and defend them. They remained near the house for the whole summer, rarely wandering, till one fatal day at the beginning of the sporting season, in autumn, on hearing the report of a gun, they disappeared and were never seen again. And, rather abruptly, that is the end of that. So I'm going to start something new, and I'm going to keep it to a bird theme. We're going to Bird Neighbours, an introductory acquaintance of 150 of our common birds, by Neltje Blanchan. I tried to look up pronunciations for that, a Dutch name in America, but it was a big struggle. I couldn't find anything that seemed credible, so that's my best guess. If anyone has suggestions, please let me know. Preface. Not to have so much as a bowing acquaintance with the birds that nest in our gardens or under the very eaves of our houses, that haunt our woodpiles, keep our fruit trees free from slugs, waken us with their songs, and enliven our walks along the roadside and through the woods, seems to be, at least, a breach of etiquette towards some of our most kindly disposed neighbours. Birds of prey, game, and water birds are not included in the book. The following pages are intended to be nothing more than a familiar introduction to the birds that live near us. Even in the principal park of a great city like New York, a bird lover has found more than 130 species, as many probably as could be discovered in the same sized territory anywhere. The plan of the book is not a scientific one, if the term scientific is understood to mean technical and anatomical. The purpose of the writer is to give, in a popular and accessible form, knowledge which is accurate and reliable about the life of our common birds. This knowledge has not been collected from the stuffed carcasses of birds in museums, but gleaned afield. In a word, these short narrative descriptions treat of the bird's characteristics of size, color, and flight, its peculiarities of instinct and temperament, its nest and home life, its choice of food, its songs, and of the season in which we may expect it to play its part in the great panorama nature unfolds with faithful precision year after year. They are an attempt to make the birds so live before the reader that when seen out of doors, its recognition shall be instant and cordial, like that given to a friend. The colouring described in this book is sometimes more vivid than found in the works of some learned authorities, whose conflicting testimony is often sadly bewildering to the novice. In different parts of the country and at different seasons of the year, the plumage of some birds undergoes many changes. The reader must remember, therefore, that the specimens examined and described were not, as before stated, the faded ones in our museums, but live birds in their fresh spring plumage studied afield. The birds have been classed into colour groups, in the belief that this method, more than any other, will make identification most easy. The colour of the bird is the first and often the only characteristic noticed, but they have also been classified according to the localities for which they show decided preferences, and in which they are most likely to be found. Again, they have been grouped according to the season when they may be expected. In the brief paragraphs that deal with groups of birds separated into the various families represented in the book, the characteristics and traits of each clan are clearly emphasized. By these several aids, it is believed the merest novice will be able to quickly identify any bird neighbour that is neither local nor rare. To the uninitiated or uninterested observer, all small, dull-coloured birds are common sparrows. The closer scrutiny of the trained eye quickly differentiates and picks out not only the song, the Canada, and the fox sparrows, but finds a dozen other familiar friends where one who has eyes and sees not does not even suspect their presence. Ruskin says, "The more I think of it, I find this conclusion more impressed upon me, that the greatest thing a human soul ever does in this world is to see something. Hundreds of people can talk for one who can think, but thousands can think for one who can see. To see clearly is poetry, prophecy, and religion all in one." While the author is indebted to all the time-honored standard authorities and to many ornithologists of the present day, too many for individual mention, it is to Mr. John Burroughs her deepest debt is due. To this clear-visioned prophet who has opened the blind eyes of thousands to the delights that nature holds within our easy reach, she would gratefully acknowledge many obligations. First of all, for the plan on which Bird Neighbours is arranged. Next, for his patient kindness in reading and annotating the manuscript of the book. And not least for the inspiration of his perennially charming writings that is so largely responsible for the ready-made audience now awaiting writers on out-of-door topics. It is hoped that the illustrations in this edition of Bird Neighbours will do much to add to the pleasure and profit of the reader. Through the courtesies of the National Association of Audubon Societies, the pictures painted by artists who are specialists in bird portraiture embellish this book. Each portrait has been examined and corrected when necessary by an authority. The birds are pictured as they are in life, each according to its own habit of existence. The author takes this opportunity to express her appreciation of the work the National Association of Audubon Societies has done and is doing to prevent the slaughter of birds in all parts of the United States, to develop bird sanctuaries, and inaugurate protective legislation. Indeed, to it, and more than to all other agencies combined, is due the credit of eliminating so much of the Prussian-like cruelty towards birds that once characterized American treatment of them from the rising generation. Neltje, Blanchan. The Nature Library by John Burroughs. I do not propose in these introductory remarks to this Nature Library to discuss the merits or character of the separate volumes further than to say that they are by all competent hands, and so far as I can judge, entirely reliable. While accurate and scientific, I have found them very readable. The treatment is popular without being sensational. The library is free from the scientific dry rot on the one hand, and from the florid and misleading romanticism of much recent nature writing on the other. It is a safe guide to the world of animal and plant life that lies about us, and that is all the wise reader wants. He should want to explore this world for himself. Indeed, Nature study, as it appeals to us in books, fails of its chief end if it does not send us to nature itself. What we want is not the mere facts about the flowers or the animals. We want through them to add to the resources of our lives, and I know of nothing better calculated to do this than the study of nature at first hand. To add to the resources of one's life, think how much that means. To add to those things that make us more at home in the world, that help guard us against ennui and stagnation, that invest the country with new interest and enticement, that make every walk in the fields or woods an excursion into a land of unexhausted treasures, that make the returning seasons fill us with expectation and delight, that make every rod of ground like the page of a book in which new and strange things may be read. In short, these things that help keep us fresh and sane and young, and make us immune to the strife and fever of the world. The main thing is to feel an interest in nature, an interest that leads to a loving, unconscious study of her. Not entirely a scientific interest, but a human interest as well. Science upon the one hand, and an appreciation of the mystery, the beauty, and the bounty of life upon the other. The child feels a human interest in nature when the schoolgirls come to school with their hands full of wild flowers, or the boys make excursions to the woods in May for winter greens, or black birch, or crinkle root. They are all moved by an interest that is old and deep-seated in the race. Now, if to this interest and curiosity we can add a little science, just enough to guide them, we lift these feelings to another plane and give them a longer lease of life. The boy will not be so likely to rob birds' nests after the savage in him has been humanized by a touch of real knowledge, and he has come to look upon the bird as something worthy of naming and studying, and that has its place in the economy of the fields and woods. A touch of real knowledge. How humanizing and elevating it is, simply to learn that all the plants have been studied and named, even the humblest, that they all have vital relations with one another, family ties, that the great biological laws are operative in them also, that the deep, mysterious principle of variation, which is at the bottom of Darwin's theory of the origin of species, is working in the lowliest plant we tread upon, to know that the chain of cause and effect runs through the whole organic world, bending together its remotest parts, that everywhere is plan, development, evolution, to know these and kindred things, a few of the fundamentals of science, is a joy to the spirit and a light to the mind. Science in the world is like the surveyor and the engineer in a new country. It opens up highways for the mind. It bridges the chasms and marches. It gives us dominion over the wild. It brings order out of chaos. What a maze, what a tangle the world is, till we come to look upon it with the clues and solutions in mind which science affords. The heavens seem a haphazard spatter of stars. The earth, a wild jumble of plants and animals and blind forces, all struggling with one another. Confusion, contradiction, failure everywhere. And so it was to the early men, and so it still is to those who have not the light of science. But so it need not remain to the child born into the world today. The great mysteries of life and death, our final causes and ultimate ends, still remain and will continue. But nature now, compared with the nature of a few centuries ago, is like a land subdued and peopled and cultivated, compared with a pathless wilderness. And yet I would not in this connection, when considering the field of natural history, lay too much stress upon the scientific aspects of the question. To the real nature lover, the bird in the bush is worth much more than the bird in the hand, because the nature lover is not after a specimen, he is after a living fact, he is after a new joy in life. It is an important part, but by no means the main part of what ornithology holds for us, to be able to name every bird on sight or call, to love the bird, to appreciate its place in the landscape and in the season, is to relate it to your daily life, to divine its character, to know it emotionally in your heart, That is much more. To know the birds as the sportsman knows his game, to experience the same thrill, purged of all thoughts of slaughter, to make their songs music in your life, this is indeed something to be desired. The same with botany. I regard its classroom uses as very slight, but educational value of the technical part is almost null. But the humanizing value of a love of the flowers, the hygienic value of a walk in their haunts, the aesthetic value of the observation of their forms and tints, these are all vital. The scientific value which attaches to your knowledge of the names of their parts or their families, what is that? Their habits are interesting. The means of fertilization are interesting. The part insects play in their lives, the honey yielders, the pollen yielders, their means of scattering their seeds, and so forth, all are interesting. To know their habits and seasons, to have associations with them when you go fishing, to land your trout in a bed of bee palm or jewelweed, to pluck the linnaea in the moss on the Adirondack mountain you are climbing, to gather pond lilies from a boat with your friends, to pluck the arbutus on the first balmy day of April, to see the scarlet lobelia lighting up a dark nook by the stream as you row by in August, to walk or drive past vast acres of purple loosestrife, looking like a lake or sea of color. This is botany with something back of it, and the only place to learn it is where it grows. The botany that trails the days and the season in the woods and the fields with it, that is the kind that has educational value in it. I confess I have not much sympathy with the laboratory study of nature, except for economic purposes. Nature under the dissecting knife and the microscope yields important secrets to the students of biology, but the unprofessional students want but little of this. I know a young woman who took a postgraduate course in biology at a noted summer school, and the one thing she learned was that certain bacilli were found only in the aqueous humor of the eyes of white mice. The world is full of curious facts like that have no human interest or educational value whatever. If one could number all the trees of the forest and all the leaves upon the trees, what would it profit him? To know the different kinds of trees when you see them and the function of the leaves upon them, that were more worthwhile. I've read studies of leaves that were just as profitless as to know their numbers. I've heard discourses upon the changes in the plumage of certain waterfowl from youth to age, and from one molt to another, that were as profitless and wearisome as studying the variations of the leaves or their numbers. I hardly know why I'm impatient when people come to me with their hands full of different leaves and ask me what tree is this from, and this and this. If your business is not with trees, if you live in the city and care mainly for city things, why bother about the trees, unless for the pleasure of it during your summer excursions into the country? And if it affords you pleasure, you will not want anyone to tell you. You will want to identify the trees themselves. The same with the birds. The main profit of this branch of natural history is in the pursuit, not in the name, but in the bird. It is the chase that allures the sportsman, and it is the chase that profits the nature student. Did you ever receive a gift of brook trout by express? How pitiful they look, stale fish only. But the trout you brought in at night after threading for miles of mountain stream, its voice all day in your ears, its sparkle all day in your eyes, the love of its beauty and the purity all day in your heart, wading through bee balm or jewelweed, skirting wild pastures, starting the grass or the woodcock with their young, surprising bird and beast in their home occupations. These were trout with flavor. Whatever opens up new doors or windows for us into the world about us, whatever widens the field of our interests and sympathies, has some sort of value, moral, intellectual, or aesthetic. But much of the so-called nature study opens no new doors or windows. It affords no mental satisfaction or illumination or aesthetic pleasure. It is mainly pottering with dry, unimportant facts and details. Do you know the edelweiss of our own matchless arbutus after you have merely analyzed and classified them? No more than you know a man after having weighed and measured him. The function of things is always interesting, What do they do? How do they pay their way in a rigid economy of nature? How do they survive? How does the bulb of the common fawn lily get deeper and deeper into the ground each year? Why does the wild ginger hide its blossom when nearly all other plants flaunt theirs? Why are the plants of the common mousea, Antennaria, always in groups, one sex here, another there, as if prohibited from mingling by some moral code in nature? Why do nearly all our trees have a twist to the right or the left, hardwoods one way and softwoods the other? Why do the roots of trees flow through the ground like runnels of molten metal, often separating and uniting again while the branches are thrust out in right lines or curves? Why is our common yellow birch more often than any other tree planted upon a rock? Why do oaks or chestnuts so often spring up where a pine or hemlock forest has been cleared away? Why does lightning so commonly strike a hemlock tree or a pine or an oak, and rarely or never a beech? Why does the bolt sometimes scatter the tree about, and at others only plough a channel down its trunk? Why does the bumblebee complain so loudly when working upon certain flowers? Why does the honeybee lose the sting when it stings a person, while the wasp, the hornet, and the bumblebee do not? How does the chimney swallow get the twigs it builds its nest with? From what does the hornet make its paper? And with that philosophical question, I'm going to call it a night. As always, you can find the originals of both of tonight's books on Project Gutenberg at the links in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepytime Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.